Hello and welcome to our inaugural Milieu Conversations session. My name is Stephen Tracy and I'm the COO at Milieu Insight. Today, we're going to be exploring the relationship between social media usage and mental well-being. And where I wanted to start today was to introduce our panel of experts. Thank you all for being here. We really greatly appreciate it. So first up, we have Lena Teo, who's the Director of Therapy and Mental Wellness Services at CARE Singapore. Next to her, we have Claire Leong, who's a counselor at Sophia Wellness. And finally, we have Thomas To, who is a counselor and hypnotherapist at Thrive Psychology. So thank you all so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
So before we get into the panel discussion, I want to share a little bit more about some of the research we did recently that's going to be the backdrop for the discussion we're going to have. So at Milieu Insight, we're really interested in exploring human behavior. And a recent study that we carried out by one of our senior researchers, Antarika Sen, looked at the relationship between mental well-being and social media usage. And what we essentially did was we polled over 2,000 Singaporeans over a series of different surveys. And those surveys looked at a number of different things. One of those surveys, we tried to better understand social media usage. So things like which social networks do they currently use, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, et cetera. And also how much do they use these social networks and how do they use them? Are they creating content? Are they posting? Are they writing comments, et cetera? And we carried out a number of other surveys, such as the Appearance Anxiety Inventory Assessment, which helps us understand how people view themselves and whether they are at risk of varying degrees of body image anxiety or mental health issues. So to start off today, I want to share some of the results of the recent study we did on the correlation or the relationship between social media usage and mental health. And using the Appearance Anxiety Inventory Assessment, we found that roughly 17% of the adult population is potentially at risk of having some type of body image anxiety. So this is not an official diagnosis, but they fall within the reporting scale of being at risk of having some kind of body image anxiety issues. And what we found that very interesting was that this was much higher among youth, particularly those between the ages of 16 to 24. And it was also correlated with higher levels or a higher usage of social media. So 3 hours a day was generally the breaking point, where if you used social media for more than 3 hours a day, which is quite a bit, you were much more likely to suffer from some form of body image anxiety. And again, this was a lot higher among youth between the ages of 16 to 24. So additional findings was that there were specific social networks that we found that were also tightly correlated with potential issues of body image anxiety. And those were actually the more visual social networks, such as TikTok and Instagram in particular. So we found that people that spent 3 hours or more per day on those particular social networks were much more likely to suffer from some form of body image anxiety. So using those findings as a starting point, Lena, I wanted to start with you and ask what you felt about the findings of the study, and is it consistent or not consistent with the work you're doing at CARE Singapore?
Thank you for the question. First of all, thank you for having us here. I'm also mindful about the impulse of binary conclusion to such a complex problem. Mm-hmm. And because it's not a simple kind of connecting two dots only, it's multiple facets of issues that could derive this kind of outcome. And coming to the impact of the social media, we are seeing an increase in mental health challenges amongst this age group, in particular the youth that we work with. However, we have not ascertained it to a BIA kind of statistics that was found in your research. Especially during the pandemic period, we are seeing an exponential increase in terms of the mental health challenges. It went up by fourfold. I'm not sure whether Claire or Thomas are seeing an equivalent amount of jump in mental health challenges. But generally, yes, depression, anxiety.
And just before we go to the other panelists, talking about age as well, are you finding that there's a specific demographic over the course of the pandemic that was more affected by those issues, or was it kind of all age groups?
At CARE, we generally work with the youth from primary school, the 9 to 17, 18 years old. We are seeing more towards the adolescents in the 14 onwards, 14, 15, 16, 17 onwards. They're having a lot more of issues pertaining to their body image.
Got it. And Claire, similar question for you. Based on the findings that we shared with you, is it consistent with what you're seeing in the work that you do?
I think they are pretty consistent with what I see in my clients, especially the subject of the more visual social media platforms. So I have a lot of clients who are very active on Instagram and TikTok. Like Lena said, they're around that age group of maybe 14 to 16-ish. They're on these platforms a lot. They have issues related to depression, anxiety, and recently there's the trend of self-diagnosing, whether it is self-diagnosing with obsessive compulsive disorder, autism, borderline personality. It seems to be a rising trend.
That's interesting. So let's follow up on that, this trend of self-diagnosis. So what do you think is driving that? Is it a particular social network, and is it a trend on social networks? And what is also the drawback of that? Do you find that people are coming in and saying that I might have this disorder?
I see it a lot on TikTok. I don't know if there are particular influencers, so I'm not on TikTok myself, but from what I hear from my clients, it's usually a video that they see on TikTok that says things like, signs that you have OCD, signs that you have autism. And the signs that they're talking about are things like throwing tantrums when you're younger, having to tie your shoes a certain way. And people are very excited to jump on this, like, I had tantrums when I was younger, so I have autism.
Right.
But to have signs or to have symptoms of a particular disorder or issue doesn't mean you have that issue. So the example that I like to give them is that you can be nauseated, but it doesn't mean that you are pregnant.
Right. And I'm curious to know, what is the impact of that? Is that driving a greater level of anxiety, or are you seeing greater anxiety because people feel that they might have some kind of diagnosis that they may not actually have?
So there's anxiety from it, but strangely enough, sometimes it's not illness anxiety in the sense that they worry that, I have autism. But some of them, you even see them that they kind of want to have, let's say, autism or borderline personality, because then they get to be part of this exclusive community online. It's like getting an identity without putting in the effort of finding out who you are. So if I say that I have borderline personality disorder, I just take the traits of someone with BPD and I put them on me, and tada, I have my own identity now.
I see.
Yeah, so it's not just illness anxiety whereby they come in worrying that they have something. Some of them, you even get the sense that they kind of want to get a diagnosis. There's also the issue of, there's also the factor whereby if they have a diagnosis, then they don't have to take as much responsibility for their behavior.
And Thomas, what are some of the signals or signs that you come across in your work that might show or signal someone who might be abusing social media or being negatively affected by it? So we know that the data shows that there might be a correlation between time spent, which 3 hours is a lot of time in a day. Are you finding that there are other things that are a clear signal of someone who might be overusing social media in ways that might negatively affect their health?
Signs that or behavior that I observe is closely related to the comments that they receive or the video that they have seen that influence their what they think of it or perceive things to be. And they kind of hold a strong value to what they have seen digitally and kind of create the same thing in real life, even though it can be quite unrealistic at times. At the same time, it's not about really removing social media per se, but really the responsibility of parent-child collaboration of how to mediate that. As early as childhood, parents are always there to teach the child the value of what's right and what's wrong. And that's something that we cannot avoid. The knife is sharp, the pot is hot, and things like this is something the parents have to be there to teach. If there is no education to it, then there is a lack of literacy for that. And the same for social media, there's a lack of digital literacy among younger population. And so the usage are based on how society functions.
I see. Thank you.
Just to add on to that about the whole when is it an issue thing, I think it's important also to look at whether it impairs the youth's social occupational functioning. So for example, Thomas says that he's on social media like 3 hours or more a day, right? But if it doesn't affect his life, if he can function socially, he can do his job, he's still, a friend, he's still a son and all that, then I don't see a problem with it. So I think it's when it impairs someone's functioning, whether it's a youth, whether it's an adult, that it really becomes an issue that is something we need to look at.
Can you tell me a little bit about some of the things that Sophia Wellness does, or that you do at Sophia Wellness, to tackle issues that of mental health that might be negatively impacted by overuse of social media? What are some of the things that your organization will do?
Right. So as a counselor, when I work with clients who come to me with issues that seem to be related to social media, I think one of the things to tackle, first of all, is the function of that behavior. So there's a reason that they are on social media. There's a reason that they are using it in a particular way. So one of the things that we can do is we target the function of this behavior. Are they looking for something in particular through social media, right? Like that human connection. Are they looking for validation? Are they looking for a sense of belonging or identity? And then if you're able to identify the function of this behavior, then maybe you understand it a little bit better and you can get a little bit deeper into the issue. I think another thing also, it's important to, when you work with teenagers, especially the younger teens, or maybe, let's say tweens, like 10 to 12 years old, it's also important to involve the parents, not to say ban social media use, because let's be honest, if parents ban their kids from using it, the kids are just going to be using it behind the parents' back. So it's about teaching the parents to moderate and regulate the use of social media.
I see. And I wanted to switch the conversation to talk a little bit about like health and safety as it relates to these social networks. So we've talked a little bit about TikTok and Instagram, and they're the ones that came through in the study because I think they're obviously very popular. They have mass appeal. They're very visual platforms. And interestingly enough, every social network, or some of the big ones, whether it's Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, all have resources and sometimes features related to health and safety. So for example, Instagram does have a set of features that allow you to go in and impose limits on how much time that you view the app. And if you set a 30-minute limit and you hit that, it'll come up with a notification. And TikTok has a fairly comprehensive set of resources on their website about health and safety, and where it talks about overuse and even in some cases gives resources for parents and things like that. What I wanted to talk about now is, do you think that they're doing enough in your experience? And we can talk generally. We don't have to talk specifically about TikTok or Instagram, but do you think the big social media platforms are doing enough to offer both resources and features to ensure that their platforms aren't abused or that there isn't overuse? And also, do you think that they could do, what else do you think they could do more? So Claire, maybe we'll start with you.
I think they are trying to do a lot. The question of whether it is enough, it's a little bit tricky because, so we've identified overuse as one of the issues, right? But for these social media platforms, it is, at the end of the day, a business that thrives on the use of, that thrives on use. So the more people use, the more revenue they have. So I guess that makes it a little bit tricky for them to really impose limits on use time for people. Although I do think that maybe certain things should be done more. Like I understand that certain social media platforms have community guidelines, and if someone comes across a post that violates these community guidelines, they can report it. There's an investigation, the post may or may not be removed. Although I do think that for these community guidelines, maybe there could be more guidelines about possibly misleading posts, overly filtered or edited photographs. Like I know sometimes you have people who boast about their fitness regime, for example, but they have overly edited photographs. They use body filters. So I'm just thinking, if a 14-year-old were to see this and they would think that I want that body, all I have to do is work out like crazy. So then there's that harm, right? So maybe one of the community guidelines can involve things like that, like misleading filters or claims that a certain diet or a certain product can help you achieve a certain body type.
When I was kind of researching the panel, I found all these kind of resources that they offer, but I thought it was also interesting as a user of these platforms. I'd never come across them before, and that's just me. But I'm wondering if they could be doing more to push this kind of health and safety information to the average user. So what do you think about that?
Well, like what Claire said, there are some safety features, but basing on the numbers of the finding in the research, it's always never enough. It's
Right.
always more to be done. As long as we see that the youth are also at risk, and so therefore to make a difference, but rather it has to be a concerted effort from the app maker, the regulatory bodies, the parents, the educators, to come together, all hands on deck, to look into what can be done to improve in and mitigate the risk to our adolescents, the youth. Also, a case in point, like the videos that went viral on TikTok, was it the blue whale challenge, skull breaker challenge?
I think I missed these ones, but
Gosh, those are really negative impact, and it's gone viral, and we get fatality in terms of the youth, because like I said earlier, they are very susceptible to this kind of risk challenge, and the more likes they have, the more they are encouraged to try and do risky behaviors. So these are the areas that I think is almost like playing catch-up game in trying to remove all this video content that's constantly being pushed up, to dial up the end users, or to dial up the usage.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, because the occurrence of these like challenges, it's not like they emerged only from TikTok, but they seem to be very common now, where in some cases they're very dangerous, and they lead to harm, or in some cases fatalities as well, which is concerning. But maybe on the topic of who needs to step up or do more in this case, you mentioned a couple of different places: parents, the people themselves, government, the app makers, etc. Thomas, what's your take in terms of maybe it's obviously probably everyone needs to play their part, but do you think that one of those entities needs to be doing more, like government regulation, or is it the app makers? Who do you feel needs to be doing more than they are today?
At the end of the day, technology gives us the convenience, and technology can also help us regulate some of the things. One of the things I find, this is my opinion, is giving people the autonomy to decide what type of content they want to view. It's like Pinterest. If you're interested in nature or interior, and that will be the only thing suggested to you, which I think TikTok and Instagram doesn't have that at the moment. They just push the popular content.
And Claire, your thoughts, who do you think is at the top of the list of needs to be doing more? Is it the app makers? Is it government regulation? Is it parents?
I think maybe the government and schools can be doing a little bit more about it, a bit of psychoeducation for parents, about how they can help to monitor the use that their kids the social media use of their kids. Maybe about integrating this kind of education into the school curriculum, as part of health education that can begin as early as primary school, because I think even primary schoolers are on TikTok nowadays. So they are just presented with a whole bunch of content, and I guess it can be overwhelming if you're a primary schooler going on TikTok and you have all these content coming in. So it can be integrated into the curriculum, how to deal with this content, what counts as healthy, what counts as unhealthy, how do I know if what I'm consuming is unhealthy, how do I know if it's affecting me, and maybe I need to speak to my teacher, speak to my parents, speak to my school counselor about it. So I think that maybe the government and schools should step up a little bit more.
That's very interesting. One of the other things, so we were talking a little bit about the app makers and their role in this, and again, they have features and these resources around health and safety. The news, the algorithms and the feed that you receive is obviously a big driver of what makes people consume and create content. And there's not a lot of transparency about how the algorithms are serving content. How obviously it's based on your behaviors, things you viewed, but there's not a great deal of transparency about what you can see. And as far as I know, there's not a lot of control you can impose on it to say, hey, I want to tweak the algorithm to only see this kind of content or block this kind of content. And whether it's the individual or the parents, it doesn't seem to be something that kind of exists. All the features that I've seen from some of these platforms are more about just capping usage, and maybe there's some other things. But what's your thoughts on like the role of like, especially like with the TikTok feed? It's interesting because with Facebook, you had this kind of, you kind of take a step back and you scroll through content it's very visceral on TikTok. You kind of instantly see the next video. There's no breaks in between. How important is the algorithm to you? And do you think that it's important to allow parents or the individual to have more control over the algorithm and the content that they see?
I think a lot can be done from the app maker because they are in charge of the design of the tool. They are the know-how expert. Although there's some safety features that's already in place, I think in terms of, just diverting a little bit here, in terms of verifying the user's appropriate age group in setting up the account, that part I wonder whether if there's any foolproof verification. For example, I think it was TikTok, the age limit is 13 years old, but who knows whether if the person is 9 years old or 10 years old that gets in and set up an account, right? Also, once you're in the dark web, who knows, even if you set a boundary that is strictly for adults, then, what is to stop the younger one, the vulnerable, to get in, or bad influencer or a predator to come into so-called a safe space for the younger adolescents.
Right. Interesting. And staying on the topic of like what can be done, maybe Claire and Thomas, outside of like what the app makers can do in terms of creating features or resources, do you have any thoughts on other things that we could be doing, whether it's anyone, like government regulation or even like civil society, nonprofits? Are there other things you think or that you're excited about, like ways that could help address potential overuse of social media? Things like, a national kind of unplugged day, or even just like bringing more like training or courses into primary schools. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think I agree with what Claire has mentioned earlier is schools can put in curriculums to increase the digital literacy of younger audience so that when they are using social media, which they will, they are more aware of the content that they see and what it means for them. And that is always the first line of defense because as a social media company and tech company, their main objective is to understand the psychology of what general population like, and they will work towards that direction so that we're addicted to it. So there's a saying that scrolling through social media is like playing jackpot in a casino. When you win the jackpot, the lights, the sound, it kind of pumps you up, they give you the excitement, and the same things also happen in the social media from the likes and from the views that they get or from the laughter, and that they create that level of dopamine release. And so that is what the tech company is trying to do, and they're doing very good at that. So the first line of defense is educating the younger population of such risks so that they know ways to mitigate it.
I think on top of like getting it into being part of the curriculum, I think parents also need to be made aware of these dangers, right? So like you said, training and courses, possibly not just for the kids, but as well for parents so that they know what to look out for. Maybe schools can give updates to parents about particularly dangerous trends like the skull breaker challenge, or like I remember a few years back there was this challenge to see whether you were skinny enough, was that you were supposed to reach your hand across your back and see if you can touch your belly button. So like these kind of things, these are challenges that pop up on different platforms. So yeah, maybe there should be a way for parents to be made more aware of these kind of things, things to look out for if they notice their kid is doing something that, hey, that's kind of like that challenge. Maybe I should talk to my kid about that.
Okay, so one of the findings of the study was also that there were certain behaviors on the social networks that also correlated with potential issues of like body image anxiety or just a poor mental well-being, which is the more time, we asked questions like, how much time do you spend watching videos, reading comments, or even creating content? And one of the things where we saw a spike was the people that spent more time reading comments and actually writing in the comments versus actually creating content or viewing video. So it seemed to be a trend around just venturing into the comments. And if anyone knows, like the comments, particularly on a platform like YouTube, are not exactly the place to go to get inspiration. There can be a lot of negative stuff in there. There can be positive as well. It's context matters, like the type of content. I remember reading about this concept known as immediacy, which is the reason that people can be so mean or cruel very quickly online is because of the lack of immediacy. Like when we're sitting across from each other, you can sense someone's body language and they're right in front of you. Versus when you're looking at a screen, you type something, that there's something that's missing that can make people, even normal people, like people that don't have a tendency to be cruel, to say things that are really awful. And this can sometimes compound the effect of bullying and people being negatively affected. And this isn't just youth. I think this happens to everyone. Do you have experiences also working with people and trying to educate them on the importance of just being kind and being careful about how they are writing things online? Because sometimes they could write something that someone could take very negatively without that person really knowing it.
If the youth were to come to me or any of my counselors, they would share about the distress over the cyberbullying or about how they encounter shocking news about fake news rather through Twitter, and how distressed they are, with this spread of information that's not true. Then we have to counsel them sometimes in front of a computer. We would just go on the keyboard and try and see what kind of experience that they're going through and help them and do a lot of psychoeducation in the whole process.
I see.
And many a times we have to rope in the parents or the school teachers or peer support for them.
Right. And I mean, on the other side, sometimes people can end up being the bully without them even realizing it. Have Claire and Thomas, have you encountered that before, where you had to work with someone and help them understand the impact of comments they might have written or the impact that would have had on someone?
So I've had a similar experience, right, whereby I had a client who sent a mean picture to someone, and she didn't understand why her friend was so upset about it. She said that, she just thought it was funny, her friend posted a selfie and then she sent a picture of a odd-looking cartoon character in response. So what we had to do was, I had to really walk her through it. Like, how do you think your friend felt when she saw this reply from you? And she was saying, but it was a joke, and then you have to get into how certain things like intonation, the way you say things, don't really translate that well over the keyboard, right? Like in person, I can say something funny, but it's funny because of the way I say it, or it's funny because I'm laughing while I say it. Over the keyboard, like just words on a screen, it's very different. It can sound completely different from how you intended it. So I think one of the important things that I do talk to my clients about is that when you're online, your intention doesn't always get conveyed the way you want it to be. The message you send and the message they receive is different. I think maybe to add on to the whole bullying thing, right? I think the scary thing about bullying right now is that a lot of the times it starts off in school, right? It's about friends, so-called friends. I mean, they're bullies that you meet in school. But the thing is, right now they follow you home. They're mean words, they're nasty comments. They follow you home, you take out your phone, you're flooded with it. Whereas in the past, maybe after you walked out of the school gates, that's it, you don't see them until the next day. But right now, they're on your phone, they're on your computer, they just follow you wherever you go.
Right.
Yeah, I guess adding on that point, it is also important to teach the youth the whole idea between constructive feedback and those that are just doesn't make any sense at all, and that is extremely important. And through that, they are able to source out things that they can improve in. If it is right, if it is not, then they just can ignore it.
Yeah, the idea of constructive feedback is interesting because the way we communicate verbally and written is obviously very different. And some people are very effective written communicators, or other people are very effective at verbal communication. And I think sometimes people miss that. They don't realize that the way they write something can be easily misconstrued or taken out of context. So I think that's a very, very good point. So we've come to the end of our discussion today. Lena, Claire, and Thomas, I want to thank you so much for coming in today and sharing your opinions. It was really insightful. And thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.